All right, welcome everyone to this week's edition of the Elections Weekly podcast. I'm Eric, obviously your host, and this week we have Terrace, who is new to the podcast. He's been on our VP panel, but this is his first time on the podcast. You can follow him on Twitter. He wrote a great article about Iowa for Elections Daily. Also joining us in a little bit will be Dylan Wade, who has previously done podcasts for us, and he has his Popcorn Politics podcast, which we host on the website. So we'll have a good episode tonight. We were originally going to start off with kind of an overview of some of the the July 14th primary results. But we have breaking news actually out of Oklahoma, which is that actually I think Terrace can kind of go over this, but it has big implications for redistricting going forward in the state.
Yeah, so the redistricting campaign, it was a plan to have an independent commission proposal to be put on the ballot in 2020. After some court battles, the courts decided against allowing electronic signatures, so that has rendered that campaign null and void for 2020. They're hoping to continue with into 2022, but this gives Oklahoma Republicans full control over redistricting in the incoming census cycle.
Mm-hmm. And obviously this has big implications. This has big implications for the future of the state, obviously, because currently the state is run mostly by Republicans, but also it has a competitive district, Oklahoma's 5th congressional district, which is currently represented by Kendra Horn, a Democrat. For the first time in quite a while, a Democrat has represented that seat, and she's very vulnerable in the election. So the general idea was that if she were able to hold her seat, then they give her a little bit of mercy in redistricting. You could actually draw a pretty compact seat in just Oklahoma County. But this ruling will effectively allow the Republican Party, which has complete control of government in Oklahoma, to redistrict as desire going forward in the state. Obviously, we have the race rated at the moment as either a toss-up or lean Republican is what most reputable outlets have it listed as. I believe we have it listed as lean Republican, but I could be wrong. But regardless of that number, it is a very competitive race, and if ultimately Republicans are able to win back that seat, this will make it a lot easier for them to draw a safer district next time that won't be at risk of flipping in a blue wave. Right now, the leading Republican candidates in the runoff are Terry Neese, who finished in first, and Stephanie Bice, who finished in second. Stephanie Bice just got a big endorsement today from Mike Pence. We also have an interview with her tomorrow. Joe Szymanski, who's a regular of the show, I did an interview with her, and it will be posted tomorrow morning on Elections Daily. So definitely be sure to check that one out because she is one of the major candidates in that district. Also, Oklahoma had another thing today, which is that they're able to resolve some of the legal issues revolving around the Supreme Court decision that made much of eastern Oklahoma tribal land again. So they've managed to reach an agreement between the state and the tribes, and it's being submitted to the legislature. And so that's another big development out of Oklahoma, a state you usually don't hear too much about. But definitely pay attention to Oklahoma this cycle. That race in particular, but in the near future, even if Kendra Horn manages to win, they could easily lop that district up into a couple pieces. This is a state that I believe Republicans want 65 to 70% of the vote in, so it's not really too difficult to divide the state into 5 safe districts instead of 4 at the moment. But with that, we're going to go ahead into our regularly scheduled coverage, which was to begin kind of do an overview of some of those July 14th primaries. If you missed the live stream, there are primaries out of Alabama and out of Texas, as well as the main Senate primary there. The 2 big races of the night were in Alabama's Senate race, the Republican primary runoff between Tommy Tuberville and Jeff Sessions. Tuberville was easily able to secure a victory in that primary. He won around 61% of the vote, won all but 3 counties in the state. He even managed to win Tuscaloosa, which is an incredibly impressive feat for the former head coach of Auburn. And then the Texas Senate primary, you saw MJ Hager managed to record a narrow victory, a narrower than expected victory over a rival Democratic candidate, Royce West, who had some strong support from establishment Democrats in the Black community, but ultimately wasn't able to bring it across the finish line in recent weeks. So what are kind of your thoughts on some of these big results last night, Terrace? I know there were some down ballot results that were fascinating as well, including one race that's not even been called yet.
Yeah, so I mean, Alabama in particular was impressive just because at least I personally was expecting definitely some anti-Auburn vote to be occurring.
Mhm.
That really didn't end up being a factor in the low turnout race. And even though the Alabama Democrats on Twitter have been trying to pounce on the fact that Doug Jones is Alabama versus Tommy Tuberville's Auburn, I don't think it'll end up being much of a factor going on later in the race. I think Doug Jones is definitely not at a point to have a good road to victory, if at all.
Mhm.
Texas certainly was impressive for a good chunk of the night. It looked like West was definitely making this closer than expected, but seeing the Rio Grande Valley just come in and really just sweep for MJ Hagar was impressive. But also, we do have a lot of trouble out in the Rio Grande Valley, as Texas 23rd's Republican runoff has been closer than expected. Uh,
Mhm.
Tony Gonzalez, who is endorsed by Trump, leads by 7 votes versus Raul Reyes, who was endorsed by Ted Cruz, just narrowly behind, waiting for some more absentee ballots and the like to still come in. And this race is probably heading to a recount of some sort.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I do want to address something for our viewers. Some of you may have been watching our live stream. We did call that race for Raul Reyes. Based on the information we had at the time, it appeared that Bayard County was completely in. It reported that it had 100% of the votes in through the New York Times and through, I believe, Decision Desk. I could be wrong there, but the New York Times definitely had them in at 100%. Votes had stopped coming in, and so we had generally assumed that Reyes had the advantage. However, Bayard County eventually resumed counting votes. They were not actually completely in, and that is what has made the race allowed Tony Gonzalez to tighten it up. Not Tony, allowed Gonzalez to tighten the race up, and ultimately he has a small lead at the moment. It will go to recount. There's no question about that. This is definitely a very bitter primary. We have that congressional district at lean or likely Democratic at the moment. If Reyes were to win, we would move it probably to safe Democratic, given how conservative of a candidate he is. Um, but yeah, the other race, obviously the Texas one that Terrace mentioned, is actually an interesting demographic example in Texas. So you could actually map pretty effectively Royce West, his performance of the vote in proportion to how many black voters there are in an area. Royce West is black, and he had the endorsements of many of prominent black Democrats in the state of Texas, and he did very well in East Texas and in Houston, Dallas, Tarrant County, so the Fort Worth area. He did a really good job winning votes, but outside of there, he struggled, specifically in the Rio Grande Valley, El Paso, San Antonio, Austin area. His strong performance in the East was what was able to make it a little bit close. But Hager pulling out on top, the numbers she pulled with Latinos and white voters was able to secure her the advantage there. The Alabama one was the most fascinating one to me, at least. We had watched throughout the night. Tuberville was trailing in only a few counties, and one of them was Tuscaloosa, which is where the University of Alabama, the dreaded rival of Auburn University, is located. But towards the end of the night, he was actually able to win the county with around 52% of the vote. So a really impressive performance from him. Several Sessions had kind of a late court push from some more populist or Trump-leaning elements of the party, who were willing to overlook his grievances with Trump because of his more ideologically aligned positions with him, specifically some anti-immigration, trade, globalization sort of stuff. But it was not able to pull him across the finish line or even get him close. We currently have Alabama at Elections Daily at safe Republican, and we do not anticipate that changing. Most other outlets have it at likely Republican at this point. Definitely. That one ad, I don't know if you saw the ad this morning that Republicans put out, was kind of a strange ad, which is that Doug Jones has a big secret, which is that he's a Democrat, and that was the entire ad.
Yeah.
Normally, this kind of content might be a little bit difficult in some other states, but given the lean of Alabama, this could actually be a fairly compelling advertisement for those voters who might be willing otherwise to vote for him as a candidate. Obviously, we have him trailing at the moment, and he's not projected to do much better throughout the rest of the night. But regardless, this is definitely a little bit more of an interesting race with him than with Sessions, I would think, given some of the opinion polling. I don't know if you saw some of that.
Yeah, it's been off and on what I've seen, but certainly that NRSC ad definitely, seemed off to someone who may not know exactly what it's like in Alabama. Alabama is just deep red in a presidential level turnout. It's just going to be the death knell of Jones.
Mhm.
You look at the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in Walt Maddox in 2018. He gained he had more raw votes in that election than Jones did in his win over Roy Moore in 2017. And that was just, and the difference in turnout from that is nothing compared to what the difference in turnout will be at the presidential level. So really
Definitely.
having that ad, I mean, I don't even think necessarily that Republicans needed to run that ad, because I think they still were going to win just basis on having huge Republican turnout in the presidential election. So
Definitely. And for those who aren't familiar with Alabama's lean, this is a state that Donald Trump won by over 25 percentage points, and that's not an abnormality in the state. Almost all votes for the Democratic Party in Alabama come from black voters who actually don't represent it. There's a large enough portion for 1 or 2 congressional districts out of 7 at the moment, but obviously that's not enough to win you an election unless there's horrendous white turnout and a F tier candidate, an F minus tier candidate like a Roy Moore. But at the presidential level, Donald Trump is probably going to win by at least 20 points, I would think. So if Doug Jones wants to win, he's going to need to win 21% of he's going to need to win those Trump voters and some more. It's just,
which just doesn't seem possible at this point.
yeah. You have to really contort yourself to come up with a scenario where Doug Jones can make this competitive, let alone an election he can actually win. And that's kind of a standard we use at elections day, is that if you have to contort yourself to come up with a scenario where the race can be won, it's really not a competitive race at all. It's why we have Michigan rated as likely Democratic for the Senate at the moment. It's because the generic polling for Trump is just so awful. And frankly, the polling for John James hasn't been phenomenal either. So it's really hard to come up with a scenario where either of them win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even when you compare John James's performance in 2018, I mean, he did better than Bill Schuette, but you also have to look. Stabenow didn't really campaign much as herself for her own race. She was really campaigning with Whitmer and other state and local Democratic tickets. So that's why John James was able to do much better than the national Democratic environment for a state like Michigan. But even still, his recipe to win involves Trump really bringing it close in Michigan, which just is not happening. And at least I can't foresee it happening in the future.
Yeah. And you take that same standard and apply it to Alabama, and it becomes even clearer. The closest example we have of a state with a similar lean is Massachusetts. In 2012, obviously, you had Scott Brown running against Elizabeth Warren, a subpar Democratic nominee, and she's always performed relatively poorly compared to the rest of the state party in the state of Massachusetts. He had sky-high approvals, was either the second or most popular elected official in the state, period. There was not really a concerted opposition to him as a person or as a candidate. He was generally well-liked and respected as a bipartisan moderate figure, which Doug Jones really hasn't tried to do, if we're being honest. Massachusetts is also a much more elastic state. It's a state that is much more open to voting for a Republican down ballot than Alabama is for voting for Democrats down ballot. And even though he ran a really strong campaign, he was still lost to Elizabeth Warren by a fairly decisive margin. It was under 10 percentage points, but by the night it was over, it was, I believe, a 7 or 8 point win for Elizabeth Warren, just because the lean of that state was so overwhelming. Alabama is more Republican than Massachusetts is Democratic. Trump did better there. He had a higher margin of victory. So even if Doug Jones were some amazing candidate polling 70% of the voters in approval in polls, which he's not, it's about 50-50. And by 50-50, I mean 40-40, and then maybe 20% don't know. It's just hard to picture a scenario where he comes out of this on top, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't make sense at all.
Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, in Texas, Texas is kind of an interesting example because I think it's seen as more competitive at the presidential level, specifically than the Senate level. Hager isn't actually the best candidate, I don't think.
No, and Democrats really just failed at recruiting in this race. I mean, you look Beto O'Rourke, the 2018 nominee against Ted Cruz. He ran for a presidential run. That crashed and burned in spectacular fashion for someone who could have possibly jumped to the Texas Senate nomination with some of the comments he made about guns and gun control. And you have Joaquin Castro, who, similar thing, probably could have made it at least somewhat competitive. But again, Texas, we're probably looking at more of an anti-Trump vote rather than a pro-Democratic vote.
Yeah. And definitely that's one thing is I actually know Republicans in Texas, and they were more concerned about West as a candidate than they were as Hager. Just they actually have Oppo on Hager. She's not really that compelling of a candidate. Her advertising has not been that good. She just generally has some flaws as a candidate, besides the fact that she can raise money, which is obviously big. You need to be able to campaign effectively, and Cornyn has still a lot of residual support among urban and suburban voters. Which really makes them particularly well suited for this environment at the moment in the state.
I mean, yeah, and just name recognition too in the state. I mean, MJR was a congressional nominee. She didn't really put her name out that much to besides Democrats. She's been trying to gain to her side for the Senate campaign. And really, maybe nationally, she may be more well known amongst Democratic circles, and they may think that, hey, she's known statewide. When you're on the ground in Texas, name recognition for MJ Hagar is subpar at best.
Yeah. And obviously some of it boils down to being more liberal, but the general sentiment seems to be Trump is not, it's not an anti-Republican state at this point. It's very much not supportive of Trump, but other Republicans have been able to win in the area. And John Cornyn seems particularly well suited. Most of his weakness comes from the right wing of the party, not from the moderate wing of the party, the establishment, Greg Abbott sort of people. People who voted for people in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, who voted for Greg Abbott for governor, but also voted for Beto O'Rourke for senator. Those are the sorts of voters that John Cornyn is able to pull a bit more effectively. And Hager is going to ultimately have to win over those voters, and that's going to be fairly difficult for her, I think. It's not impossible. We have Texas listed at lean Republican for the presidential race, and for likely Republican for the Senate at the moment. All of these ratings would obviously change as the month goes on, more polling comes in. We currently plan to update our polling, our election projections at the end of the month. So the 1st of August is when we'll be putting out new results. It may increase in the future, but obviously it's a race we're keeping an eye on. There are also some other primaries, particularly one I found interesting was the 13th Congressional District primary. Where you had Ronnie Jackson, who was Trump's former physician, running against the chosen candidate Mac Thornberry, had his chosen successor, Josh Weingartner, and he was able to secure a victory fairly decisively thanks to some performances. This is in the Texas Panhandle. It's quite literally the most Republican district in the country. This is a district that Democrats pull under 20% of the vote in, so it's not competitive. But we had speculated on the stream that this may be a district that's poor suited to Ronnie Jackson as a candidate. It's predominantly rural. It's a large district. He's going to have to be driving all over the place. He's going to have to be very constituent focused, supportive of the Farm Bill and all sorts of other specific issues that affect rural communities. If he's unable to keep up with this sort of thing, he may face a primary similar to how Tim Huelskamp in Kansas was primaried by Roger Marshall from the left, was able to win. Because of that farm support that is vital in a district like this.
It's just, it did feel like, at least to me, Ronnie Jackson was parachuted into this race just to be kind of another ardent Trump supporter. And so definitely, I will not be surprised if he does end up getting primaried, just because, again, the rural aspect of this district, just the need for constituencies. At least I'm afraid, at least for the constituents in this district, that Ronnie Jackson's just going to be sitting in Washington, acting as another mouthpiece for the Trump administration. The Trump administration, if it is in the White House, when he's in Congress by that point. just act as another mouthpiece and just not do anything in terms of constituent services. You have some other members of Congress, Republican members of Congress who've been there for a long time who, while also ardent Trump supporters, know constituent services and all that. This is the first political campaign that Ronnie Jackson's ever been in. He was a military person beforehand. He was, again, chief physician to the president. So may not necessarily have the knowledge or the expertise on, okay, how to really run a congressional office and the like.
Mm-hmm. And giving you a Republican win is tantamount to victory, this primary ultimately will be important. There's always the possibility he could be an excellent representative. He could really be actually in tune with local issues and be willing to go above and beyond, like Mac Thornberry did for a long time in the district. Generally, that's how you survive in these sorts of large rural districts. You see this in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska. This really laser-like focus on local issues. But there's also the possibility he could just get bored after a few terms. He's not going to be parachuted to the front of even though he's in a safe district, he's not going to be parachuted to the front of leadership off of this. He's ultimately going to have to be sitting on the backbench, sitting in committees for quite a while if he wants to make an inroads into the House. And that can be a very boring job if you're not really truly in it for the job. If you're just in there because the president supported you and you found a district willing to vote for you, you still got to represent them. And that's ultimately what matters in these sorts of districts, is having that local support, being willing to be there for a community that does need it.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and obviously, this district is so Republican that even a horrible, truly awful Republican nominee would skate to victory in this district. There's no chance a Democrat even comes close to winning this district ever. It is just beyond Republican. It is quite literally the most Republican district in the country if you look at the Cook Partisan Voter Index. I think it's R plus 33 or R plus 32. That's 33 percentage points more Republican than the national average. That's obviously really, really Republican. So ultimately, this is tantamount to election there. But we also had other races that night. We had in the Texas 22nd district was one that was being interestingly looked at. We have this as a toss-up race. This district stretches from Fort Bend County into some of the other suburbs of Harris County as well, and into a little bit of Harris County, so the Houston area. Pete Olson was retiring, and so you had a contested primary between Troy Nehls and GOP donor Kathleen Wall, who's sort of a perennial candidate at this point, just throwing money, trying to get elected in districts. And Nehls utterly demolished Wall. She spent over $6-7 million to get this race and finished with, I believe, under 30% of the vote in this runoff.
Just short of 30%.
Yeah.
And again, it was Troy Nehls, again, just from Fort Bend, and just crushed it in Fort Bend. 70% of the vote in that county alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's the sheriff of Fort Bend County.
Yeah, so, and that county makes up more than most of the districts, so it's easy to see why he won. And now you have Kathleen Wall, who's just becoming sort of a Michael Bloomberg of the Republican Party again, just trying to throw money at a wall, hoping to win a race.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And the one disappointing thing for Republicans in this district is it is a district that is moving Democratic at an increasing rate. It was drawn as a Republican vote sink, but like many suburban districts in Texas, has shifted to the left considerably under the Trump administration. Both candidates tried to kind of out-conservative the other, which is not ideal in this sort of district where you're going to have to separate yourself from Trump to some degree. The candidate they'll face is Sri Preston Kulkarni, who was the 2018 nominee for the seat, is a decent candidate for Democrats. The district is very diverse, large Asian community, Hispanic community, even Black community. Like Fort Bend County itself is kind of a microcosm of really one of the most diverse counties in the country if you look at it. I believe it's around 31% non-Hispanic white, and then the other racial groups make up 25% each, or around 21%. So very diverse area. You're going to need to be able to appeal across party lines to kind of hold this district long term.
Yeah, and just again with what you were talking about, how the two candidates were trying to out conservative each other. My main concern is, does this become a problem for Republicans, and conversely for Democrats in the future? Is in your competitive seats, are you going to see your base become so polarized to being conservative or being liberal, where it becomes such a drawback from whoever your nominee may be? Will this end up damaging your prospects in these competitive seats and end up closing you out from some ways to gain control of the speaker's gavel in the House?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And this is the sort of district Republicans need to hold if they want to take over the House, let alone if they want to even hold their current position, let alone take control of the House. So that's going to be one to focus on. We've gone over some Republican primaries. I think we're going to jump back into some of the Democratic ones now. The big one was Texas's 24th congressional district. This is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. A lot of it is based in Tarrant County, and some of it in Dallas and other surrounding the other two northern counties. Republicans already have a nominee in the district. They have Beth Van Dune is Beth Van Dyne is the candidate. On the Republican side, the primary last on Tuesday was over who the Democratic nominee was going to be. You had a Kim Olson, who was a former Air Force colonel and was their 2018 nominee for Agriculture Commissioner. And then you also had school board member Candace Valenzuela, who was endorsed by some of the progressive wing of the party. And she was ultimately able to come out victorious in the district. She's a candidate who's supported by Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, John Lewis, Ayanna Presley. So this is a big win for progressives in a competitive district.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, can they win this seat now is the next question. If they are able to win this, it will be a huge victory for the progressive women in the Democratic Party, as they've been able to show, hey, we can actually win the competitive seats now. Nebraska second was always a huge sticking point in the fight in 2018. But Tara Eastman did not have the support of the National Party behind her towards the end of the campaign. But this time around, it does seem the National Campaign Committee for the Democrats is staying behind Tara Eastman in this district, in Nebraska second. So it looks like the same is happening now in the Texas 24th. So it's really starting to see kind of a placation between the progressive and the more moderate wings of the Democratic Party in terms of these congressional primaries.
Mm-hmm. And this is the very typical. This is the definition of an Abbott O'Rourke district. It voted for Mitt Romney by 22 percentage points and voted for Ted Cruz by 23 in 2012. In 2016, though, Trump only won it by 6 percentage points. And then in 2018, Beto O'Rourke won it by 3 percentage points, while Greg Abbott was carrying it by 10. So a lot of crossover voters here, a lot of people who've proven their willingness to vote for a Democratic nominee. The question is just, of course, can a progressive pull it over the finish line? Like in Nebraska, you had issues with Kara Eastman. But she's a much stronger candidate than people gave her credit for in terms of performance. They kind of dropped her like a ball, expecting her to not win, but she ultimately came very close to unseating not just any Republican, Don Bacon, who's a very moderate, in tune with his Omaha-based district. Right now, Beth Van Dune is a much more conservative candidate than Don Bacon is. And this is a district that's equally as competitive.
So yeah, if that's really what's going on, then it'll definitely be an interesting battle to see what happens, how close this will be to this district. Maybe about bellwether for how Texas goes in the fall too, in terms of at least at the presidential level. But again, we're probably going to see what happened in 2018. Having O'Rourke voters, we'll see a lot of Biden Cornyn voters in this district for sure.
Definitely. And so that's kind of a big rundown of some of the big results last night. It would also be worth mentioning the main races in the second district. I believe we still don't know the Republican candidate there. The presumed frontrunner, Eric Brakey, actually ended up finishing in third. It appears that his flamethrower advertisement didn't really help him as much as he expected it to. Obviously, ranked choice voting will be the dependent of the result there. So we were waiting to see how the ranked choice ballots go. No candidate finished with 50% of the vote. So the remaining votes, the second preference votes will be counted, and then one of the two candidates will have over 50% of the vote. It would be between the top two.
Yes.
And in the Senate primary, The Democratic candidate, Sarah Gidgen, managed to do very well. She won her primary by a resounding margin against a Bernie Sanders endorsed candidate and another even further left progressive candidate in Maine with a very Bree Kidman, who is a genderqueer feminist mermaid, is what she's described herself as. She uses so what they describe themselves. I guess she doesn't use pronouns. So regardless, the candidate did very poorly, and then Elizabeth Sweet, the Bernie Sanders endorsed candidate, didn't do that much better. I think it finished with around like 22% of the vote. So very good performance from Sarah Gidgen in that district, or in that race. Sorry. So yeah, one thing that I think I did like, which just kind of goes into what someone we're getting a comment here, is that these numbers all came out very quickly, which is I think very, very good. This is what we want to see on election night, although ultimately that's going to turn more into election week, it seems like. But we know the results of most of these races within a night. Come November, that's not going to be the case. There's going to be a lot of races we might not know for a week or for a month.
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge in terms of funding too for just polling centers and counting centers in general, because really, in order to see what most of us may expect on election night, given the huge increase in absentee balloting that we're probably going to see nationwide in some form or another, whether it's a small jump or a huge jump, it's definitely going to be a challenge. I know there's been discussions about what would be a good alternative to all this, but just making sure nationwide we just keep in mind results that are going to be on election night are probably not going to be what the final result is. There's a lot of concerns whether Trump's going to end up leading in the election day votes in a lot of states, which is probably what's going to end up happening. But the absentee ballots are probably going to be carrying Joe Biden across the line, and just seeing what may happen to reactions from the Trump campaign in many states and also from the populace as a whole, given that this is something that's not really been seen at a nationwide level before.
Definitely. I had seen some people, and I've kind of gone into this camp as well, is that we need to have some sort of general standard as to when these votes are going to come out. I had seen the idea that I had seen in particular was making sure that all votes are postmarked for a week before the election. So they're all opened up, they're sent in a week before the election or postmarked by that point and opened up on election night. This would ensure if we're going to a predominantly vote by mail situation, this could ensure that the votes are all counted and we don't result in a situation like New York 27, the special election there, which I think would be incredibly dangerous for election night, where the Republican candidate was leading with a 30 to 40 percentage point margin, and the race eventually narrowed to be within 10 percentage points. That's incredibly dangerous. If you see a lot of races going like that, regardless if it's justified or not, you are going to see people conspiracy theorizing and making pointless accusations that people have rigged the elections. I don't think that's fair to the poll workers. I don't think it's fair to either political party, and I don't think it's fair to the candidates. There needs to be some sort of solution to this problem.
But the question is whether we're going to see that solution actually occurring at a nationwide standard. Maybe we'll see some states kind of do what has happened with coronavirus, a response, kind of some regional coalitions in terms of what they may do in terms of election response, in terms of what they may do in terms of reporting and all that. But ultimately, it is going to be very, very complicated.
Definitely. And we'll keep an eye on this in the future. Obviously, we have a big election night planned in November, and we're also going to be continuing to cover primaries as they come along. I believe the next one is in 2 weeks. So, yeah, this is definitely something states are going to have to consider, because I just don't think this is sustainable. If you have this problem on election night or election week, election month, whatever it's going to turn out to be, this could potentially cause problems.
Yeah, it's going to be something that we haven't seen in the United States. We've seen in other countries. We've seen it in Mexico before, way back when, during the reign of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, in terms of some vote changes that have occurred as the counting has gone on. But this is just this is just crazy beyond belief.
Yeah. There's going to need to be some sort of solution for sure. So definitely, we're still waiting for Dylan to join. He's been kind of held up, but we'll continue into our next segment, which is some of the recent polling and fundraising numbers that have come out. If you have time, we'll do a short question and answer segment towards the end, where some of your questions, for those who are in the live chat, some of your questions can be answered regarding some of this. But polling in the last few weeks has been incredibly good for the Biden campaign in particular. We saw a recent poll; he was up by 15 percentage points. There was a poll came out yesterday or today where he's up 9 points in Pennsylvania. Really, really good numbers for the Biden campaign, and it's kind of gone through in fundraising as well. Democratic candidates out fundraised all of the Senate Republicans except for John James, who is in a race we do not rate as being very competitive at the moment. Even the Democratic candidate in Alaska has outraced his Republican counterpart. So combined with all this stuff, Democrats are now kind of looking at the prospect of perhaps winning a majority in the Senate, something that was kind of seen as unlikely at the start of the election campaign.
I mean, yeah, we're seeing definitely fundraising numbers have been across the board very good for the Democratic Senate candidates. There have been some states, such as Kentucky, where while the Democratic candidate did out fundraise the Republican candidate, it's probably not going to be a sign that the Democrats are winning that seat. Maybe it'll just cause the Republicans to have to divert some money in some form or another, which could spell doom for them in the closer states, for sure. And again, in Michigan, and two in Iowa, where we saw that the incumbents get outraised by their challengers. However, there's been a cash on hand advantage for the states. Whether this fundraising difference continues into the next quarter and into the next few months, that may make a difference in how those races turn out. But again, with the polarization, it's probably going to also have to depend on who's winning those states at the presidential level. Is it going to be Donald Trump? Is it going to be Joe Biden?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just actually Trump had a major campaign shakeup. Kind of predictably, he's finally gotten sick of Brad Parscale, who has been made some unusual choices as campaign director. Ever since he made the Death Star tweet, his campaign has imploded. And I'm not even making that up, but you can actually almost pinpoint it to the moment he made that tweet is when just the polls started going incredibly downhill. But they have a new campaign director. Parscale has been moved to campaign officer or to a digital marketing role. They've stopped spending money in New Mexico, which is a really good decision, in my opinion, and have started redirecting the resources they were pumping into that state, which apparently was Brad Parscale's vanity project, trying to flip New Mexico of all states, rather than, say, Minnesota or, I don't know, New Hampshire, Nevada. Like, those states have equal or more electoral votes. So that's kind of the big shakeup. They realize they have a problem at the moment, and they're trying to work to correct it. Like, I mean, we're even looking at Senate races that shouldn't be competitive. Like, for example, Iowa. You've written an article on Iowa, of course, but the Senate race there is appearing to be increasingly competitive. Texas has become more competitive. Both of Georgia's races appear competitive. North Carolina appears very competitive. Like, Democrats have a lot of pickup opportunities. They're kind of spread across the board. None of them are sure cases at this point, aside from maybe Arizona and Colorado. But they appear to be in a pretty strong position. I think the Trump people will kind of counter. This is kind of the nadir of his presidency. It's hard to picture it getting any worse, and he may improve by default. But obviously, improving from 15 points is not a situation you want to be in if you're the incumbent president.
I mean, yeah, no, this is definitely not the situation he wants to be in, and it's also some smaller states too, that are becoming competitive, which means it's not necessarily as expensive to compete in those media markets. Means those fundraising advantages really come into play. But in some cases, you're seeing Democratic Senate candidates who've had to make some tough decisions. You're seeing in Montana, where the Democratic nominee is Governor Steve Bullock, and his response to COVID is definitely going to play in the state. So far, he hasn't had to do some decisions which have been very unpopular for Republican-based members, such as what's happened in Michigan and Illinois, for example, and Wisconsin. So that's really effective. but also in Iowa. It's just a weird situation there because, yes, it is a very Trumpy state. This is where I like to call it the home of the Obama Trump voter. Uh, had one of the largest swings. In fact, it might have been the largest swing from a state that went Obama in 2012 to Trump in 2016. Where Joni Ernst just hasn't really done much as incumbent, uh, hasn't really had much to say to her name. So to have that fundraising disadvantage against a candidate who was a failed congressional nominee in 2018, it's definitely been interesting and tough for Ernst in that respect. Also tough because Greenfield has a similar background to Ernst in terms of being, farm raised, and also has interesting, very personal and compelling story concerning uh, Social Security and the Iowa Farm Safety Net, which really could end up playing well if that still plays well in the state in the fall. Certainly in the Iowa First, cut down the margins in the Iowa Fourth. Iowa First being Northeast Iowa, very farm heavy and white working class voter. Iowa being, apart from Texas 13th, a one of the most Republican districts in the nation. Who very narrowly reelected Steve King in 2018 and voted him out. So it's been interesting in that regard too.
Definitely. And I'm actually going to pull up, I don't usually do this on the podcast, but I'm going to pull up a map to kind of visualize how bad of a situation Trump is in at the moment. This is if Biden is up by 15 points, that's a swing of around 13 percentage points from 2016. This is what a map of that might look like. So if you're looking at this right here, welcome Dylan to the stream. We've just been discussing the recent polling numbers coming out of the country.
I can't hear you guys.
Oh, you can't?
Huh.
Okay. I had my browser deafened for some reason.
Oh, that would explain it. So yeah, so we've been going over some of the more competitive the polling numbers that have come out. They've kind of been abysmal for Trump. I was just about to show a map of what a theoretical uniform swing from 2016 to 2020 would look like with the current Biden numbers, which would result in a 400-point electoral landslide with multiple other pickup opportunities. So the tipping point state here would be Maine. Second would be the furthest left district to flip. After that, assuming a uniform swing, which obviously there's problems with the uniform swing, next states up would be South Carolina, Alaska, Mississippi, Utah, Missouri, Indiana. These are states that obviously a Republican cannot afford to lose. Now, in my personal opinion, states like South Carolina and Mississippi are too elastic to flip, whereas a state like Montana or Utah or Missouri would be a little bit more elastic and more likely to flip in such a scenario. Obviously, it'll be closer come election day, but these are the dire circumstances Republicans are facing right now, where you can literally, there's a contiguous block of just the most rural states in the country, as well as some deep South stuff, and then that's basically it. Like, this is like a DEFCON 1 situation for Republicans if you look at this map. It's about as bad as you can do in the current situation.
Yeah, and as much as I imagine it'll tighten up, there is a reason to suspect that it won't. I mean, there's a reason to suspect the bottom could fall out.
Yeah. I mean, the fundamentals, President Trump at the moment, he has one fundamental, which is that people in polling seem to still trust him on the economy to some degree, although some polling has indicated Biden has started winning on that issue. But his coronavirus response approval is down. His ideas for reopening schools seem to be very unpopular. It's just a lot of stuff is going up against him at this point.
Yeah.
And Biden, frankly, there don't appear to be any major scandals at the moment. Unlike Clinton, Biden is a candidate who is gaffe prone, but in terms of actual major candidacy altering scandals, he has basically nothing at the moment. There's no email. There's no equivalent to the emails.
No, and as for the gaffe prone, I think his campaign is learning, give Trump the mic. He'll do it to himself. Don't send Biden out there.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, having Twitter just remove the ability of blue checks to tweet like they did yesterday in response to some of that problem could be the single best thing that would happen to the Trump campaign. I mean,
It really would. I found it amusing that he had to announce Preskel's firing on Facebook.
which honestly is more of like the boomer headquarters, if you really think of where his base truly is, but where he lives is Twitter.
Yeah.
That's not to be judging. I mean, most of us here live on Twitter as well.
I mean,
But
this
we're not
website was kind of founded because of Twitter.
Yeah, we're not the president of the United States. He is, ultimately. But there are some good signs for Republicans, though. Specifically, the Pennsylvania polling, I think, showed a few things that might give a little bit of pause to the idea that we're going to have some Democratic landslide. First off, is if you look at the historical landslides, races like 1972, 1964, Goldwater, Lyndon B. Johnson, 1984, 1996, those sorts of races where they're decided by 10 or more percentage points or around that margin, they didn't actually result in some sort of down ballot surge of candidates. You had a couple close races that pulled over the edge, but it's not like you had some massive supermajority emerge. And the Pennsylvania poll that showed Biden up by 9 points, which would be fairly consistent with a 15 to 12 to 15 point lead nationally, if you look at kind of the union of states. The Democrats on the generic ballot were only by 2. Brian Fitzpatrick in his district losing by 9 points. Trump losing by 9 points, but Brian Fitzpatrick up by 14. Those are some positive signs that Republicans would want to look for. Obviously, Fitzpatrick is a uniquely strong incumbent for that district. He has a lot of support from labor, very moderate, very perfect Republican for that seat. But the generic ballot in Pennsylvania only being Democratic by 2 points in a 11-point Biden win, that doesn't signal that you're going to see some sort of massive down ballot landslide. That's the one positive I think Republicans see from some of this.
To counter that, I would point to the not exactly great polling, not reputable rather, out of North Carolina, showing Cunningham up by 8. And Cunningham's not a great candidate. He's going to poll at exactly what Biden does, probably. Yeah. Maybe outperform or underperform by 1 or 2.
Yeah. The problem with North Carolina is everyone has low name ID there. Basically, until you get a couple months before the election, it's actually really hard to figure out the state of the race. People were convinced that 2016 was competitive, their Senate race. And then the final months, but because people didn't know who Richard Burr was, frankly, nobody knows who our senators are. And I think that's a good thing. I think they're doing good work behind the scenes. And that even applies to Kay Hagan. She generally did her work. She wasn't a grandstander. But they have low name ID. But by the time the race came around, Burr won by 6 percentage points. Outran Trump substantially in the state.
Well, didn't Trump win by 3?
He won by 3, but a 6-point win is about as good as you're going to get federally in North Carolina.
Yeah.
I mean, keep in mind, North Carolina is a very inelastic state. It's a landslide win in North Carolina, a true landslide, is like a county, is like a statewide office where you have like Sherry Berry, who is a living meme, winning by over 10 percentage points. And then Steve Troxler, who has basically offended no one and just manages the state fair. And as long as he manages the state fair competently, people are going to be fine. Like, a landslide here is 12 percentage points. That's not really that big. So a 6-point win for a sitting senator is pretty impressive. Trump winning by 3 was fairly impressive, given the lean of the state. Obviously, also I have general issues with PPP polls in North Carolina to begin with.
PPP isn't great in general.
Yeah. They're better than Gravis. I mean, I'll give them something like that. Better than probably. But
probably better than OAN.
Yeah, OAN. Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, there's multiple problems that we're looking at there. I still think that we need to look at where the race is. Think about where the race is in November as opposed to now. Some of these races will tighten. Some of them may get further out. But if this is the nadir, that's what Republicans are truly hoping. Because if this is the nadir, they can only go up from 15 percentage points. I mean, it's hard to imagine it getting worse than this.
I think
it could happen, but
there's only one way this gets worse for them. It does the rent freeze ending and the unemployment benefits running out crash the economy?
That's where That's where you start going into Great Depression numbers right there.
Yeah, I mean, you could see a Reagan type victory for Biden if that happens. Otherwise, though, I do expect this to tighten significantly by November.
Yeah. Obviously, Biden will have to campaign. He will ultimately have to. I mean, granted, the coronavirus is kind of the perfect situation for Biden. He can just kind of sit back, do a couple of TV interviews, and be generally fine, not have to deal with any gaffes. Just let President Trump be on Twitter 24/7.
This was the campaign Biden was born for, one where he doesn't have to go out in public.
Yeah. He just has to say, hey, you remember the Obama administration? You remember how they weren't on Twitter 24/7? You got me. Like that's, I mean, it really is perfect for him.
It is.
Yeah.
It's the old front porch campaigns of the late 1800s. You know, just stand there, let your
William McKinley.
let your operatives do the work. Just stay put out a few statements. You're good.
So what you're saying is that Joe Biden is the Warren Harding of our time, the return to normalcy.
As scary as it might be to admit, yes.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say something, but you said you go first.
I saw in the chat asking about a post-convention bump. There probably isn't going to be a convention to get a bump from.
Yeah. I mean, and look, on the bright side for Democrats, they don't have to deal with the aftermath of like a fight song type gaffe. Like, there's no convention. This is just, you just sit back and do nothing and just watch as Trump tweets himself into a 15-point national deficit. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, Democrats couldn't be happier right now.
Yeah.
Just don't pick a bad VP.
And then there's also, like, this is kind of breaking news. This just happened, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes ago. Democratic officials just said that there's going to be no delegates or members of Congress at the convention site in Milwaukee next month.
Wow.
So, yeah, this just happened. So
that's a good move.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, Trump, they had to relocate the Republican convention from Charlotte, the actual convention part, not the business part. They relocated that from Charlotte to Jacksonville, which angered a lot of business owners locally, and I get that. I think truly it was. I think there should have been more of an effort to keep it, but now Jacksonville, they're having to deal with the possibility that that city, which is controlled by Republicans, will have to take additional steps as well, given the outbreak in Florida. It's just a complete debacle.
Yeah,
right? I can't for the life of me understand why Trump didn't start selling masks from day one. That could have been
because he doesn't. Because he doesn't believe in masks.
But he was talking about masks privately. He was kind of obsessed with the concept of masks early on. He just did nothing. He could have just sold them, like made it be the hat of 2020.
I mean, I agree. I just they're not that politically savvy, and it's kind of baffling.
Yeah,
I mean, the Michigan GOP. So, for those of you that may not know, I spend most of my time out in school in Iowa, but I'm still back. I'm back home in Michigan, where I'm normally from. And the Michigan GOP, after Governor Whitmer put out the executive order that, hey, you've got to wear masks and there's a fine and businesses kind of have to get stuck with it and all this.
I saw this.
Michigan GOP put out that they were selling masks with political, like Michigan GOP campaign slogans concerning Whitmer and concerning the whole situation. I have seen them out in public. They do. They are making.
Right.
Why they didn't do this sooner, I have no idea. But this could have been
whatever gets you there, whatever gets you to wearing a mask. I really don't care.
Yeah, I'm up for it. In fact, what we should do is, I think what people need to do is they need to have Democrats go on TV and say, "Stop wearing masks," and then we'll see immediately overnight, just reflexively, they're going to go. The Republicans go to masks. Like I wear a mask when I go out.
Tucker Carlson will start extolling the virtues of wearing a mask.
Yeah.
Don't do vaccines. All right, now everyone's going to get a COVID vaccine.
I mean, just seriously, be like, the single worst thing, for Democrats would be if all these old people just took vaccines, because then they'd be able to vote and they wouldn't be dead. Like all of a sudden, like you take that sort of line, then maybe some people will take it seriously. There's actually polls out that it was Gen Z and millennial Republicans or Gen Z and millennial people in general that were less interested in masks. Or that were less interested in wearing them. Generally, older people have been pretty good at wearing masks, which makes sense.
Yeah. Gen Z, you're screwing it up for everybody.
Why do you have to attack me?
I'm Gen Z.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I'm an actual millennial. I'm certified 94, so late
Yeah.
millennial still.
I'm 98. Apparently that's not a millennial, which
Yeah.
No, you're a millennial at that point.
Millennial stops like after like 97. Like if you can remember 9/11, you're probably a millennial at least.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. 98 still kind of a millennial.
Yeah. You're in the weird in between generation. You're like the generation between the boomers and Gen X.
Someone asks, does Susan Collins have a chance? No.
I think she has a chance.
Well, it's the main second. Main second. Just seeing how Trump doesn't dare, will they carry Susan Collins over the line? Because again, Susan Collins is more moderate, not necessarily a Republican that the now Trumpy Republicans up there in the old Francophone territories may want. So
Yeah.
it's possible. There is definitely a path of victory for Susan Collins. There's a path of victory for Sarah Gideon. It just depends what's main second looking like when it comes to November.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if with the map like it is now, if Biden's winning Maine second, Collins is done.
It'd be very difficult for her to pull that off. But I think the good thing for Republicans is that Sarah Gideon, even at the moment, if she has a lead, it's not by much, and she's just basically been in control of the airwaves for quite a while now. So she's basically been on the able to do whatever she wants, and she doesn't have a huge lead if she has a lead at all. That's the one thing Republicans can look at positively here and be like, once we start spending money, putting more effort into the race, there should be a more ability to do it. And they do actually have fodder on Gideon. They have there's some sexual assault stuff that in the state legislature they can go after. Corrupt, like they had some issues with campaign finance. There are stuff they can go after in this race, as opposed to like a Colorado where it's gonna be very difficult for them to do anything.
Yeah. Do you think they're going to spend money to save her, though? I tend to think they're a little more worried about Steve Daines, Tom Tillis, McSally. I don't know. I feel like they're going to throw Collins to the wolves.
Honestly, McSally is not fundraising horribly. She should just send her money to the other Republicans who are actually going to have a chance.
McSally's dead in the water.
Yeah. Like if Mark Kelly was not the candidate, if you had just a candidate raising normal money, what Martha McSally is raising would not only be great, it would be really impressive. It would be a truly phenomenal haul. I mean, what she's bringing in is really good. The problem is you have Mark Kelly bringing in presidential level numbers. Which is just
Kelly machine go burr.
Yeah, Kelly and Gottheimer share the same money printer.
Definitely.
In a basement somewhere in Houston.
Yeah. I mean, it's really impressive what he's been able to do. And there's a reason Arizona's kind of been written off for the Senate at this point. They're kind of hoping Martha McSally can move around. I do think the Montana race is going to be a problem for Democrats long term. At the moment, like you had a polling that even though you had polling with Biden, him running behind Biden in the state, and Biden being within 5 and him being down by more. That's not what you want to see. You want to see him outrunning Biden.
You had him down 2 in that poll that had Biden down 5. So you had Bullock outrunning him not by enough to win, but by a little bit.
Yeah, that's the problem. And also, it's Montana. There is stuff they can hit him on. They can hit him on guns. John Tester is pretty liberal on a lot of things, but he's not liberal on guns. He opposes an assault weapons ban. Steve Bullock supports it. That's an actual genuine issue for Montana. There's stuff that can go on. The problem is with Mark Kelly, they really don't have a lot to go on.
No, Kelly's going to be tough to hit.
Yeah. Now the one thing Republicans have positive in that race is he will have to run again in 2022. So he's basically raising money for 2 Senate campaigns. And in the meantime, assuming Democrats have control of the Senate and he's the deciding vote, which is not unlikely, you're probably not going to see him do anything too crazy because he would have to run again in 2022.
Well, to be fair, he's raising enough money for 2 Senate campaigns.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, even if Doug Ducey is the nominee, which
He's not as popular as he was right now.
No, but I feel like Doug Ducey's calculation was, all right, I'll nominate McSally and then have a better shot in 22. I mean, that's a competitive race, but Kelly's not gonna be the favorite.
Yeah. There's definitely some problems there. So I think we've done a good job of going over that. I think we'll do maybe a quick 5 to 10 minute question and answer period. If there's nothing else that pops up, we can just kind of freewheel it for that bit. But we want to keep this a little bit compact. We're trying to keep it into more like an hour 10, 15-minute format here, as opposed to kind of the sprawling 2-hour sort of stuff. We're going to leave that to the election coverage.
Right.
So we've gotten some good questions so far. Ranked choice voting in Maine will be interesting to see. It will be on the presidential vote. That thing failed. There's definitely like some. That's kind of the big problem in Maine is the ranked choice voting, in my opinion. We don't know how that's going to play at all.
National ranked choice voting.
I mean, the closest analogy we can look to it is maybe Australia, but then what happens in Australia is nothing compared to what's happening in Maine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, personally, there's a reason why I think approval voting is a better choice than ranked choice voting. It's going to take so long to tabulate the results, and people generally weren't happy. I think the main second, the whole point of ranked choice voting is that you result in a candidate that has a majority of the vote, right? But it also kind of violated the idea is that Bruce Poliquin won the most votes in the first round. He lost the election. That had some people have problems with that, and I completely get that. That's a counterintuitive result.
Yeah, it's a counterintuitive result, but it's also, I think it's a bit like the whole, this guy was winning on election day, but the mail-ins changed it. Yeah, I mean, that may look bad, but that's just how it worked. I mean, but Poliquin didn't let anyone forget it.
I mean, and two, it's how can you claim that you truly are a representative of your constituency when you only won, when a majority of people voted for not you?
Mm-hmm. And not only that, they voted for you less of them voted for you than the person ahead of you. You just wanted the ranked choice.
Well, I mean,
and I get it. I kind of like ranked choice voting. I like the idea of it going instantly to a runoff rather than it going to having to have a separate runoff election.
Yeah, and having somebody win with 40% of the vote doesn't feel right.
Yeah. Then
it just doesn't feel like it.
Yeah. And then I also do see we have a question asking who is the most vulnerable House Democrat or Republican? Kendra Horn's definitely up there.
I think the most vulnerable is Joe Cunningham, actually.
Yeah.
Mainly because Nancy Mace is a really strong candidate, and he's already floundering.
Yeah, I think Cunningham's the most vulnerable, but I think he's the most well-equipped for it, too.
Yeah. So the problem, we talked about Oklahoma 5 earlier, so I don't want to kind of relitigate it, is that whether or not Stephanie Bice is the candidate, I think will be what makes the race really competitive. If it's her, I think it moves to Lenar immediately, if it's not there already. Terry Nesis isn't as good of a candidate. In South Carolina 1, you already have Nancy Mace as the candidate. She agrees with Joe Cunningham on the single issue that he won on, which was the offshore oil drilling. He's tried to hit her on that, but she's literally been photographed with him supporting offshore drilling when they were in the legislature together. It's not something he can hit her on. He tried to go after her for while she was sick from coronavirus, which is a really bad look. His whole signature thing was that Katie Arrington was a horrible candidate who couldn't campaign literally because she was in a car accident and who disagreed with on offshore drilling in an area where that's really important. Nancy Mace has none of those problems. She's very typical Republican for that district, has basically tied herself to Tim Scott and Mark Sanford, who were very popular there, and has agreed on offshore oil drilling. I mean, there's nothing really for Joe Cunningham to go off of other than that he would be moderate, but Nancy Mace is also going to agree with him on more things. So as long as Trump is carrying it, I think he has a really good shot at losing, in my opinion.
Yeah, he has a very good shot at losing.
Mm-hmm. Brudenzi, I think Jim mentioned Brudenzi. I actually don't think the Republican nominee in 22 is Claudia Tenney, right? Not really the ideal. Yeah, that would be an immediate result if we had a better recruit there. If John Katko transplanted to that district, it'd be likely Republican overnight. But
Yeah.
with Claudia Tenney, it's not really.
No.
Unfortunately, at least for me. I mean, I'm a Republican, so obviously I want a seat that Trump won by a large margin to flip, but
Yeah.
it's just not going to happen.
And then,
Most vulnerable Republican. That's another interesting question.
well, I mean, you have the open seat in Texas 23, which is going to the Democrats most likely, but in terms of an actual incumbent falling, it really depends on the bottom falling out. I think at this point, in order to really see, like, really have a truly, like, here's a bona fide vulnerable GOP incumbent. Otherwise, it's just they're in competitive to competitive-ish races already.
Right. The most competitive Republican districts, the ones that are the most favorable to Democrats, are open districts. Like Texas is 23rd.
I mean, in theory, the most Democratic district, in fact, the only Democratic-leaning PVI district is New York 24th, which is represented by John Katko. But also, he's John Katko. He is absurdly popular, and he fits that at least the same way other people are.
Yeah. If I had to pick one, maybe Bacon.
Mm-hmm. And not because I don't think Eastman's an awful candidate. She's not ideal for the district. If you had the wife of Brad Ashford, it would be an opportunity overnight.
I mean, the thing I think that's going to matter is I think Biden's going to carry that district by a lot, and I think that'll pull Eastman over the line, even if she wouldn't have gotten there on her own merit, which I still think she could have. She's not a great candidate, but she's probably a B+.
And two, again, Don Bacon having his own brand, he's brought on a lot of kind of statewide known names in Nebraska who are Democrats who have endorsed him. If I remember correctly, the 2018 gubernatorial nominee, Ann Ashford's almost kind of implicitly nominated him, if I remember correctly, too. So it's just been an interesting situation in that district where Don Bacon's been drawing some of the local and state level Democratic support, not necessarily in terms of the party structure, but definitely in terms of some high level names.
Definitely. And I actually think I have an answer for who the most vulnerable Republican is. Mike Garcia. He's a really good district, but it's a district Clinton's going to win by probably around 10 percentage points. He's a really, really good candidate, A+ tier candidate, but it's also it's a tough district to win.
And Christy Smith has proven to be a terrible candidate.
Yeah, like that's the reason the race is really ultimately competitive is you have a really good Republican and a really bad Democrat, but when Clinton is winning by 10 points in California in a district, that makes it really competitive.
Yeah.
I think we have one more question here, which is, can we talk about the presidential race in Texas a little bit? This is from Eli Berman. Yes, and I would actually recommend that if you're not following, along with Jared Stone and Nick Morris from Elections Daily, we're doing a video series for Old Bull TV called The Map Room, and we're actually going through Texas right now. We've usually done a main overview of most of the races, but we actually are doing, since Texas is such a big state, we split it into multiple episodes. So we did the first episode on Harris County, the Houston area, which was out this week, and then the next episode will be on the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and then we'll finish up with episodes on the rest of the state and San Antonio, that sort of thing. So if you want to get an in-depth overview of those races, watch those. I don't want to redirect from here, but you can get those are going to be long-form 35, 40-minute episodes talking about Texas as opposed to here where we can just kind of sum it up in a few minutes. But as of right now, we have it at Lean R on Elections Daily. It's a race that can be competitive. There are issues for Democrats to win in Texas. It's a hard state to win in. There's so many Republicans there. There's a large rural vote, lots of suburban voters they have to win over. It has to be a really, really favorable circumstances for Democrats to flip it. Yeah,
Democrats shouldn't put any substantial investment there unless your goal is down ballot. If they're winning Texas, they've already won the election.
If they're winning Texas, they've won Georgia, North Carolina, Iowa, probably Maine second. Like, it's a stretch target. they don't need to make the mistake they did last time where they spent more money in Omaha than they did in Wisconsin. Like, you really don't want to deal with that problem.
No.
Spend your money in the states you need to do to get to 270. And then from there, whatever goes after that is great. But the fundamental goal is to get to 270. It's not to get to 410.
No.
I mean, there could be an argument there to try and go for the Texas State House. Looking kind of competitive-ish, with Texas being competitive at the presidential level.
Right. That's why I qualified with down ballot, because that actually does have some benefits.
Yeah.
But also, even then, the Republican court will just draw the maps because the state Senate isn't perceived to be as competitive as the state House, and the court, which is entirely Republican because it's Texas, and they haven't had a Democratic governor in decades. Like, there's a lot of states. I would say Georgia's a better target. I would actually almost tell them to spend in Georgia, not North Carolina right now, just because Georgia is such a fertile opportunity for them. There's a lot of states I would go to before saying spend money in Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, and yeah, someone mentioned 21 media markets. Yeah, you got to deal in Dallas, Fort Worth. You got to deal in Houston. You have to deal in Waco, San Antonio, Austin, Amarillo, El Paso.
Yeah, it's just not worth it.
Laredo. Like, there's so many places you have to spend. Like, it's not easy. This is the sort of one you do when you're 100% sure you've already got 390 electoral votes and you just want to get you want to get more. But
You
again,
want to
you need 270 to win. Like, a landslide is great, but a landslide, you know what's better than a landslide is like winning, like knowing you're going to win.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'd rather know we have 270 likely to safe electoral votes rather than have maybe 160 or so safe to likelies, and then another 100 to 200 lean to toss-ups.
Yeah.
Because you have that risk of, like, I like this website. It's called Election Dice, where they kind of visualize it in terms of like a dice, like what you need to do to see someone win. Like, right now, it's like if Trump wanted to win, it'll be the equivalent of like rolling a 6, right? If you roll the dice, it's not going to be that big of a deal, but you can easily roll a 6. Like, It's not like you play Monopoly. It's actually pretty common for you to roll doubles of dice. Like, the odds aren't to the point where you don't want to deal with the risk of it being another 2016, where you spent all this money in states that don't matter, and in the states that do matter, you spent nothing at all and got blindsided. Like, fundamentally, that has to be their priority right now. Is we need to get those states to get to 270, and what 270 looks like is you win back Pennsylvania, you win back Wisconsin, and then you like win Arizona, and like at that point you're pretty good. Obviously you win back Michigan, although it's kind of favored they win Michigan at this point. Like, you want to do that. You would rather win those states than win Texas and lose the rest of them, even if you just win Texas. Like, there's problems with going that way. Like, it's great to have a state where you can be like, nobody thought we could win the state, but we did. But you just want to win. Like, Trump kind of lucked his way into winning Michigan.
You win Texas, but you lose Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia.
Yeah, I made a joke map where we're like a joke Republican map where New Mexico is the state that is the state that puts Trump over 270. It's just a joke. But like, if you're just throwing your money around in places where it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. I do want to respond to one thing real quick. Is that Eli said that I said I wouldn't spend in NC? No, you spend in NC. I would just say you spend a lot in Georgia as well. Because they're very similar states at this point, but Georgia you just spend in Atlanta. That's all you need to do. You don't need to spend anywhere else.
Just turn
in North Carolina, you have to spend in Charlotte, and you have to spend in Greensboro and Asheville, Wilmington, and then Raleigh, and then Durham. Like, you have to spend all over the place. In Georgia, you just pump money into Atlanta. There's 3 counties with 1 million voters. A million people there.
I have to go, or we're basically done, right?
Yeah. I'll go ahead and sign us off if that's all right.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back here next week at 6:30 or 7 o'clock, same time as always. Where can we follow you guys on social media? I know we have your names up on screen, but if we turn this into an audio podcast, it'd be good if you like read them off.
You can follow me at Dylan B. Wade 1 on Twitter.
You can follow me at TV_OH_MI_IA on Twitter.
And you can follow me at D Cunningham 2. You can find all of our works at Elections Daily. You can also follow Dylan's podcast, Popcorn Politics. He does that weekly.
Mhm.
And obviously, be sure to follow Elections Daily if you haven't already on YouTube and on wherever you get your podcasts from. Definitely like the video if you liked it, and give a comment if you have some feedback for us. We're always interested in how we can improve the episodes. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.